listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, and we do thank you for listening to America's Web Radio, and we're doing something that we don't do very often, as a matter of fact, and we're looking forward to it, though. And this is that we're bringing back a show that's been on a 4-year hiatus.
Actually, 6 years.
6 years. Okay, how time flies when you get older than dirt. But anyway, we're bringing back a show that we had on shortly after we started the radio station, and it's with our host is Robert D'Agostino, and he's a little bit right of right, and a little bit, not much, but a little bit right of right, and we will be doing it every Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and it's Do Facts Matter. And Robert has been a close friend for years and years and years. He's a law professor at John Marshall Law School, and Robert, this feels like old times having you back.
It certainly does, and I'm glad to be back. I suppose gave up the show about 6 years ago. After the American people reelected the narcissistic adolescent, I decided that throw in the towel for a while. We got a big election coming up, and with some important issues and important for the future of the country. The theme of the show is going to be progressivism, the modern utopian religion. And we're going to talk about why I say that. This will be the first of a number of shows I'll do featuring the speeches and policies of famous progressives in history. But right now, I have a guest, and my guest is my son Joseph D'Agostino, also a law professor and a scholar, a true scholar, has written a number of articles, and in a future show we're going to talk about one or two of his articles, including his article about Judge Posner, who came, told the truth and said, we judges, the higher court judges, appeals court judges, judges in the Supreme Court, we don't have to pay attention to the law. We just do what's right, at least in their own lights. Joseph, are you there?
I am here.
Great. I want to throw out this question to you. If you ever hear Dennis Prager, and Dennis Prager often says, whatever the left touches, they destroy. Why do you think that's so? It's kind of a philosophical question, I suppose, but what is he talking about?
So I take a different view from many conservatives, many libertarians, other people who are right-wing or consider themselves right-wing or counter-revolutionary or so on. My view about why the left destroys everything it touches is that it's deliberate. I think that is the purpose of the left. So I think the left is led by leaders who want to destroy. I'm not saying all their followers want this. Many people are very foolish. Many people are sheep-like. They follow things that sound good, that sound nice, that sound caring, so on and so forth. But I do believe that the leaders of the left and the hardcore people over the centuries, whether it's the French revolutionaries, the Marxists, Saul Alinsky, or the leaders of the left today, I think by and large they're actually motivated by hatred and motivated by the desire to destroy, because that is always the result of left-wing policies, often immediately, if not immediately, certainly in the long run. And I think we have seen that for centuries, and I think that anyone who chooses not to see that is either choosing ignorance or choosing to pursue this destructive path. So I think that leftists are motivated by hatred. I think they're motivated by envy, anger, other of the 7 deadly sins. And I think that people need to understand that envy is a very, very powerful motivator for a lot of people. Anger and resentment, very, very powerful motivator for a lot of people. And many people are quite willing to cut off their noses despite their faces, right? That's a saying for a reason. People are very willing to cut off their noses despite their faces if they can make somebody else unhappy that they resent for whatever reason. Resentment, like Nietzsche said, they can feel better, right? They feel better because somebody else that they view as unjust or evil or whatever is suffering. Even if it doesn't help them, even if it hurts them, they feel better about themselves or they feel better about their lives, which I think to a lot of people with a maybe more conservative temperament may have trouble understanding. Now, conservatives have their own characteristic flaws, But I think, for example, the typical conservative, if they see a man who's wealthier than they are, a man who has more than they have, or is smarter or something, I think the typical conservative tends to think, well, good for him, right? Isn't that nice?
I think that's true. Let me go back. Let me just interrupt you, Joe.
The leftist doesn't.
Joe, let me interrupt you for a minute, because I think you want to get to that point again. I want to get back to your point about destruction. One of the leading lights of how you, aside from Saul Alinsky, which the Democrats have become the party of Saul Alinsky, the party of personal destruction. Saul Alinsky always advised his followers not to talk issues, just to dehumanize your opponent, attack him personally, and to make into him how many lies you told. But this also goes back to someone called Antonio Gramsci, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think Gramsci, he was an Italian communist who was put in prison during the fascist government in Italy, wrote some things, and he's most famous for his phrase, the long march through the institutions, which is that the way leftists will ultimately win would not be through violent revolution, which a lot of people thought, particularly after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was successful. But he said, no, in the West, the way leftists can win is through infiltrating existing institutions. Going inside, joining institutions, becoming personnel and leaders within institutions, whether it's within the church, within the state, within other institutions, and subverting them from the inside. Today, a lot of people call it convergence, like social justice warrior, SJW convergence, converging institutions to the goals of social justice, right, left-wing version of social justice. So that is what we've been seeing this for centuries. Gramsci just sort of popularized it and sort of standardized it, and I think that we see that everywhere in our society now, whether it's the deep state in the government in D.C., whether it's in state governments, whether it's in nonprofit charities, large corporations, churches, including the Catholic Church at the highest levels. I think we've seen infiltration, a very conscious plan of infiltration for centuries that has intensified in recent decades and has been very successful subverting the original purposes of these organizations.
Joseph, if I might interrupt, this is David Moxley, and we've started a program here on the station and doing many, many clips on it. Being a few hundred years older than you are, this goes back to when I was in junior high school, and we were taught that when Khrushchev banged his shoe on the UN table and said, "We will take you from within," this is exactly what's happening today, and we're beginning to start preaching here at America's Web Radio that we're literally in the 21st century Cold War that's more obnoxious than the 20th century Cold War, which was all about bombing America. This is more insidious than, and you hit it right on the head. The infiltration started with the infiltration of our universities, the high schools, and now into our books. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and it's been something that's gone on for a long time. A lot of people don't understand how revolutions work. For example, the French Revolution is often portrayed as bourgeois, other outsiders revolting against the king and the aristocracy. That's not really true. For many decades before the French Revolution, the revolutionaries had infiltrated the aristocracy, they had infiltrated the royal court, they had infiltrated the Catholic Church and other powerful institutions in French society, so that when it came time to trigger the revolution, there were a lot of people already in power to advance the revolution. It wasn't as simple as the old order was fighting against the revolutionaries. The old order had already been corrupted and undermined by termites inside it before the revolutionaries were able to come from the outside and basically push it over, right? So that's how the world works. That's how all revolutions work. It does not happen that they just come from the outside. And what we're facing here is scarier. First of all, because the people are here in our country and have a lot of influence. They're not over there in Russia or the Soviet Union. That's number one. And number two, the fact is the Democratic Party of today is further to the left than the Soviet Communist Party of the 1970s and 1980s. I think if you look at what the Soviet Communist Party stood for in the 1970s and 80s, you'd find there was a much more conservative party than today's Democratic Party in America.
What's the first tactic that's taught in military school? Divide and conquer. Have you ever seen so much division in the United States as we have? I can't name an area that's not in the midst of division, be it Virginia and their guns, be it the Methodist Church, be it the Presbyterian Church, be it our Congress, you name it, and there's divisiveness there. And it didn't just happen, it's been infiltrated upon us.
Well, we got that. I'm Catholic myself, and obviously we see a lot of that within the Catholic Church today as well.
Yeah, well, of course, identity politics are part and parcel of what the Democrats stand for. And identity politics means, each one identifies with a certain insular group, sex, gender, racial group, and that way they can go pick to claim victimhood, and whoever claims the most victimhood has the most privilege. You know, remember what our good friend Joe Biden, running for president, the gaffe-prone liar from Delaware, said some time ago. He said the motto of the country was "out of one, many," and he inadvertently got it right from the point of view of the Democrat Party. Anyway, let's look into this area of utopianism as a religion, and progressives. Obviously, the way they attack non-progressives. The latest interesting attack was one of Bernie Sanders' field supervisors, who indicated all we deplorables, all those who disagreed with Bernie, should go to the gulag for re-education, right?
Right, and that kind of talk from leftists, progressive activists, even some liberals, people who consider themselves not progressive but rather liberal, has been all over the internet for some time. The internet is very valuable in many ways, and one way it's valuable is any person can just post his opinion online, and you get to see it, so you can see what people are really thinking. And for some time now, progressives, leftists, liberals have been on the internet in blog posts, Twitter, so on and so forth, and now increasingly just saying it in mainstream publications. Right now it's reached the mainstream publications where they're actually saying that people who disagree with their version of liberalism or progressivism, their fashionable version, are Nazis, are fascists, right, are white supremacists, and so on. So anyone who disagrees with them is stigmatized as someone who's evil and who and it's justified to use violence against. Like, who wouldn't use violence to stop Hitler and stop the Nazis, right? And they're talking about how all Trump supporters are white supremacists, all Trump supporters are racist, all Trump supporters are fascists, and they're sometimes openly calling for violence, right? They've moved to the phase of openly, not just on the Twitter and et cetera, but in mainstream publications now, suggesting violence. So what this Bernie Sanders supporter said on camera, or worker said on camera, is not the least bit of a surprise, and I think we're going to continue to see an intensification of this rhetoric against just not necessarily even conservative people, but people who just are just not on board with the progressive agenda.
Well, what's kind of shocking about this, and we should do a show about it sometime later, is that I was reading what that Bernie Sanders field guy said, and a lot of what he said came right out of Lenin. Just what you said. You have to be with them 100%, or you're an enemy. It's just like the Bolsheviks liquidated the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were leftists, but they were more like social democrats, more like peaceful leftists. They were socialists, but they were not Bolsheviks. They were not. They didn't believe in the dictatorship of the proletariat. They didn't the vanguard to rule. They actually believed people could make decisions, and that was not good enough for Lenin. So he actually advocated liquidating other parties, other people that were on the left. Mm-hmm. I think we have a break. We'll be right back.
Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the TornadoBodyDryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super. You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shower.
Merry Christmas. I'm Patty Levan, owner of Multiland Mortgage Services, Inc. We've partnered with nationally known wholesale lenders throughout the country that offer a wide variety of home loan programs. We We can find the right home loan that will suit your financial needs. Multiline Mortgage Services, your way home. Call us at 941-201-9111 or check out our website at multilinemortgage.com. Company founded by Joseph D. Powers, NMLS 158989, licensed in Georgia and Florida.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Getting back to this idea of progressivism as a religion, which it certainly is, and one of the things you can tell that it's a religion is that people who disagree are either classified as evil and in need of re-education, going to the gulag, according to Bernie Sanders, some Bernie Sanders volunteers, and it's a religion in the sense that it's got a whole bunch of, let's see, ideas that in fact can't be, or even counterfactual. You take a look at Christianity, and Christianity, the central doctrine of Christianity is the resurrection. Well, it can't be proven at this point, and it can't be non-proven. But Christianity has never been counterfactual, at least not for long periods of time, considering all those universities that were founded in Europe. I mean, after all, this whole idea of the Catholic Church natural philosophy was really the study of nature, study of physics and mathematics. And those universities, the late 1200s, I think the first one started to form, Bologna and Paris and a few others. So the idea that the church is against science is, of course, crazy. But now we have progressives, and they are against science. I mean, how can you really believe that people can choose their own gender? How can you really believe that? How can you believe that when you abort a fetus that you're not aborting a human being? These are counterfactual. And I think, in fact, I think that abortion has become a sacrament to the progressives. What do you think, Joseph?
Right. I think that sort of comprehensive towing of a line that's required is a really strong mark of a religion, as well as the fact that their claims and assertions are empirically unfalsifiable in their view, right? No matter what evidence presented, right? So if let's say you're a good progressive on every single issue, right? Every single issue except you don't believe in transgenderism. You just say, I'm a socialist, pro-abortion, etc. I don't believe in transgenderism. What happens? You're excommunicated from the progressive movement, right? It's not good enough. Or if you're against abortion, right? You're progressive on every issue, but you're pro-life, you're excommunicated. So it's like the Catholic Church, right? It's like you have to agree with all these core doctrines or you're out, right? So it's just like a religion. A couple of differences between it and Christianity are, number one, Christians are very clear that their religion is a religion. They don't pretend otherwise. And secondly, Christians are not inventing new doctrines every year or two that then everyone else has to fall in line with the way progressives do, right? They keep becoming more and more radical. They keep inventing new things that people have to conform to. And the new things are, each new thing is crazier than the last thing, right? And so they have this, ongoing development where everyone has to come along, everyone has to accept all the core doctrines, or they're just out of the movement entirely. They're put beyond the pale, and they're probably fascist, right, or something like that. So it is, and it's also a religion in a certain kind of religion, the strain of American Puritanism, like the strain of the kind of hysterical hectoring. You must do this. We have to do this. It's an imperative we do this to save society here and now, right? Now, the big difference between progressivism and traditional Christianity, and particularly Catholics, is the utopianism. So back in the day, there wasn't this sort of, back in the Middle Ages or earlier, this idea that we're going to perfect society, right? So the Catholic Church is pretty relaxed about a lot of things because they knew they weren't going to achieve perfection in this life, right? They knew we're going to have sin, we're going to have imperfection. No matter how hard we try, we got to be relaxed about things or to tolerate bad things. Most progressives seem to continue to believe that they can create, if they just try hard enough, if they're just is hector enough and are strict enough and pass enough laws and punish people enough and put enough people in jail and so on and so forth, will achieve perfection and everyone will be happy, right? I don't know if they really believe that or they just kind of seem to believe that. But that, of course, means you can justify all kinds of things, because what wouldn't be justified in pursuit of heaven on earth?
That's right. It's all about heaven on earth. And after all, what did Danton say in the French Revolution, the first really secular utopian movement? Danton said, among other things, he said that he, in order to create his utopia of France, he was prepared to see the soil of France turn red with blood. So,
right, and I think, too, it's a sort of a debased religion in which people don't really care about the things they claim to care about, right? So the typical progressive, even the typical liberal, gets much angrier over some comedian using the N-word than they do over the high level of violence in the inner city, right? So they claim so much to care about black people, but they actually don't really get that angry at Democrats or Republicans who don't really pursue policies that might help real black American people, right? But they become absolutely hysterical and furious if someone makes a tasteless racist joke on Twitter, right? And it's just really, and it's curious too, all these other things. There's plenty of scientific evidence that transgender people, if they have surgery, sex reassignment surgery, the latest data shows 80% later regret it, right? So this is the kind of thing that if you really cared about transgender people, you would be against the surgery, because the vast majority of them come to regret it later, and of course by then it's too late and they're sterile and can't have children and so on. But they don't care. They don't really care about what happens to real people in the real world, right? We have these rape gangs here in the United States. There are rape gangs in Britain, where people who are from Muslim countries, people from Mexico, etc., will systematically groom and rape underage girls, and leftists don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about it because that might seem racist, right? So they don't really seem to care about what happens to underage girls in the real world. Just like if a woman accuses Donald Trump of sexual assault, it's a major crisis. A woman accuses Bill Clinton or Justin Fairfax of sexual assault, there's silence on the part of leftists, right? So they don't really care about what happens to real people in the real world. They care about feeling like they're good people because they conform to some sort of abstract doctrine that has very little connection to the real world.
well, I think that's really true, and you can look at Baltimore. Ever since the pressure in Baltimore for the police to stand down and the agreements with the American Civil Liberties Union about how police should behave, the murder rate in Baltimore has gone sky high. Baltimore, I think the last statistic showed Baltimore on a per capita basis is the most dangerous city in the United States. In total number of murders, Chicago still leads, but Chicago has a huge advantage in population. So here we have, and who gets killed in Baltimore? Mostly young blacks, young black males. And who does the killing? Other young black males. So the point is, if the left really cared, if the left really was concerned with homicides in the inner city, they would ask for more policing, more stop and frisk, more controls. Instead, it's just the opposite, and then they can go brag about how compassionate and how non-racist they are and how concerned they are about police violence. Never mind the violence committed by criminals against innocent people in all neighborhoods, not only black neighborhoods. It's truly amazing that these doctrines, and as I said before, I think abortion has now become a sacrament to the left. Anyone who's wants to limit any abortions is anathematized. They nurses lose their jobs who won't perform abortions. Teachers in school who express pro-life views are purged, or fired. Things are made up about their lack of teaching ability. Professors can't say it. It's truly an amazing thing. And you know what? What if I'm going to ask you, what if some conservative politician, Republican, said, "Look, we should be all right with abortion. I mean, after all, abortion gets rid of undesirables." What do you think would happen, Joe, if some Republican or conservative said that?
Well, I think they'd be denounced, but I don't know, the left is so dug in pro-abortion that they might choose to ignore it because they don't want to cast any doubt on abortion.
Well, they did.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that publicly.
That's right.
And, of course, they gave her a pass, but, of course, she's a liberal Democrat. But I don't know. I mean, for something like abortion, they're so dug in on it, they might actually get Republicans a pass on that. I think it's all about, they're very, you got to give the left credit, they're very much dedicated to winning, right? They keep their eyes on the prize. So they will ignore things if ignoring those things helps their agenda. They will push things if it helps their agenda, et cetera, et cetera. It's all sort of twisting, right? It's all very much focused on the goal because one of the traditional principles of leftism is that the ends justify the means, right? So lying is acceptable, smearing people with lies is acceptable, seizing power is acceptable, so on and so forth, because that is a traditional principle of leftism. Not all leftists believe this, of course, but a traditional principle is the ends justify the means. So I think whenever you ask that question, the answer would have to be, what would leftist leaders view as most advantageous for their agenda, and that's what they would do.
Well, their agenda, of course, is taking power. As Saul Alinsky said, there was a famous meeting in, I guess, Chicago, and I believe Hillary Clinton may have been at that meeting, where Saul Alinsky was instructing his followers, what do you want to do? And they start talking about poverty, and they talked about racial justice, defined by whatever they want to define it. And Saul Alinsky said, no. What you want to do is take power. And after you take power, you worry about that. We're up against the break. Be right back.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Want to give your family or loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the tornadobodydryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat air massage it gives me after my shower. The Tornado Body Dryer is super. You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shower.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio Online. Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, we're back and talking about progressivism, the modern utopian religion, and let's take a look at the utopians since the French Revolution, because as I said, the French Revolution was really a secular utopian movement, and they defined what utopia would be in France, at least in abstract terms: everyone equal, everyone friends. It's always in abstract terms, and of course it always leads to economic socialism because equality has to be coerced and enforced. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Mussolini was a progressive. He was heralded by his fellow progressives all over the world, the United States, in Great Britain. Mussolini, great. He's going to make what did Roosevelt say? The trains run on time. And he was the great progressive. He was going to ignore all this separation of powers, ignore. The central government would set all the rules, and that would make everybody equal and happy. So you had people like Mussolini. You have Pol Pot. and you have Mao Zedong, and you have Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler was a progressive. He was a socialist. He was an environmentalist, and he defined a future perfect society with Germans in charge. That was going to be the perfect society to rule the world. All of these movements, whether it's communism, fascism, which of course under Mussolini, fascism was initially a corporate doctrine. It then got expanded to other cultural and social doctrines. But always coercion is, since people resist living in the utopia, it always ends up with coercion. Isn't that right, Joseph?
Yes, because the only way you can get people to do these things is to coerce them. Now, of course, every society needs some level of coercion. You're going to have criminals, you're going to have bad actors, and you really have to be quite a true utopian if you think that you can have a well-ordered society without a coercive legal system to deter and punish people who commit murder, commit rape, commit theft, and so on. So,
well, but wait a minute, Joseph. Those are not crimes for the progressives anymore. They don't, in New York, they just let them go. What the bank robber said, he was in jail, he had robbed a couple of banks, and he got out of jail without bond, so what did he do the next day or so? He robbed another bank. After saying, quote, he couldn't do it, he got away with it, so he went out and robbed another bank.
Right. We've also seen several suspects in New York City who've been attacking Hasidic Jews on the street be arrested and then let go. And then they attack Jews again, and they get arrested and they get let go, right? And the left constantly complains about anti-Semitism, but because these people in New York City are not right-wing, they're typically local black people who are not conservative, not Trump supporters, they just ignore this kind of violence on the streets in New York City. So, and New Jersey and other places. So it depends, of course, on the identity characteristics of the people in question increasingly, right? It's not about the argument, it's not about the action, it's about the identity characteristics, right? It's about who. So a white man says something, oh, it's white male privilege, right? You dismiss it because it's white male privilege. If it's a black woman who says the same thing and it's a conservative thing, dismiss her as a self-hating or co-opted black woman, right? If a Muslim rapes somebody, well, we've got to give him a break because, oppression, etc. If a white man rapes somebody, of course, it's an expression of patriarchal privilege. He needs to be punished especially badly, right? Especially harshly. So we have, increasingly it's all determined by identity characteristics, how things are viewed, right? And how people should be punished. And I think that's the trend that's going to continue for some time, partly because of its service to the left, and partly because America and so many American people have an identity void now, right? They're not really Christian anymore in any serious way, most of them. There's no really clear idea of what it means to be an American, what it means to be a man or to be a woman, right? To be a human being. What does it mean to be a human being anymore, right? Do people have a clear idea of that? So since they lack identity, they latch on to things that give them identity, and increasingly the only things that give people identity are these politicized identity characteristics and doctrines.
And that's especially true for young people. I mean, young people are really, to put it mildly, suckers for these kinds of movements. It was young folks who Pol Pot used to kill 1 million Cambodians. It's Mao Zedong stirred up young folks to beat up their professors and sometimes kill them and put them in prison. It was the brown shirts in Hitler's Germany were young folks. Young folks want to feel that they got an identity, that they are part of something big and important, and that's why Bernie Sanders has all those young followers. They really think that Bernie Sanders can create a utopia or something close to a utopia.
Well, it's worse than that, I think. So I saw a survey a few weeks ago that said 36% of millennials now have an approving view of communism, okay? Not socialism, right? But up from 28% last year. Now, 36% of millennials have a favorable or approving view of communism. So that's where we've gotten now, to where over a third of young people have a positive view towards communism.
Well, young people
that's a very disturbing thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know how much of it is that young people are foolish enough to believe that communism is going to lead to good things, because it's very difficult for me to see how anyone can actually sincerely believe that, given communism's track record for 100 and some years, or if it's really an expression of kind of tribal solidarity to believe in this, just kind of edginess, annoy the old people, or a real sort of commitment to destruction, that they just want to tear things down, burn it all down, as people often say, and communism is their vehicle for doing that, and it's a negative and even self-destructive impulse.
Well, and now what Gramsci said, you got to destroy it all. Saul Alinsky said you got to destroy it all, and then you can rebuild society, create new man.
The new man, the old man has to be destroyed before the new man, right? So here's a great quote from Edmund Burke, the 18th century conservative Englishman who was opposed to the French Revolution, etc. And he talked about these, left-wing revolutionary leaders, philosophers, etc. These philosophers are fanatics, independent of any interest, that is self-interest, which if it operated alone would make them much more tractable. They were carried with such a headlong rage towards every desperate trial that they would sacrifice the whole human race to the slightest of their experiments, right? It's just amazing, right? They look so far, nothing can be conceived more hard than the heart of a thoroughbred metaphysician, right? They do not think 2,000 years, too long a period for the good that they pursue, right? So the centuries and centuries of misery and desolation that their experiments and reforms produce doesn't matter, because they believe, or at least they say they believe, that someday, hundreds of years from now, things will be perfect, so it justifies all the murder and destruction and poverty that they produce now.
Well, again, what did, after Khrushchev gave that famous speech about the crimes of Stalin and what Stalin had done to the Russian people, the gulags, the executions, and the British socialist, Fabian socialist, last name Webb, I can't remember his first name offhand, but was asked about that. What did he think about it now? Because he was a great apologist for the Soviet Union. And his answer, and this is very typical of the left, the answers are bloodless. He said, well, we always thought we would have to sacrifice a generation.
Well, it's been quite a few generations. So somebody asked Chu Enlai, who is one of Mao's leading subordinates in China, what he thought of the French Revolution. What do you think of the French Revolution, of the effects of the French Revolution? And Chu Enlai said, it's too early to tell, right? So, at that point, it had been, over 150 years since the French Revolution, right? You think maybe we could judge its results. But still, these folks have the idea that, okay, all these bad things are happening, etc., but someday all this is going to lead to wonderful things. The wonderful things never arrive, right? But yet we can continue to do these things. We continue to do these things in justification by this imagined utopia that's going to arrive. And therefore they continue to do these things. And again, some people are very sincere, particularly followers can be very sincere and really believe and fall for these things. But I don't believe the leaders are sincere. I think that many other people are not sincere, that this is really a vehicle for them to express their hatred of others, or their envy of those who have more than they do, their anger, resentment of whatever it may be, so on and so forth.
Or their contempt. I think that a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the people who support Bernie and speak, they obviously have nothing but contempt for ordinary people. I mean, President Obama had contempt, people clinging to their guns and religion, right? And Hillary Clinton, the basket of deplorables. This is all contempt, showing contempt for ordinary folks who live ordinary lives. Mm-hmm. And I think contempt is one of the great motivators for the leaders of these left-wing movements.
It is, but then that brings us to another thing that I think a lot of conservatives overlook, although more recently I think more conservatives and other people on the right are now coming to realize, which is that the rich and powerful are actually in alliance with leftists, right? So the rich and powerful, I mean the ultra-rich, I mean the super rich, the super powerful people, right? Not your average wealthy person, right, in a suburb. They have actually funded and supported and created leftism right? And they've been doing this for centuries. Karl Marx was an agent of the ultra-rich, right? His wife was the daughter of a baroness from the Phillips family, as in Phillips Electronics, right? Billionaires, right? And there's plenty of other evidence that Marx was actually working for the ultra-rich. And all of Marxism is just a constructed scam to actually enhance the power of the wealthy at the expense of others, such as the church and the traditional aristocracy and traditional royal families of Europe, right? So what you have is the ultra-rich and powerful are actually in alliance with leftists. They fund the leftists, people like George Soros, being the most famous, perhaps, but Fortune 500 companies fund progressives. And many conservatives puzzle over this. How is this possible? Because the progressives always say they want to kill the rich, eat the rich, or at least take away all their money, etc. But of course, that never actually happens, right? The financiers and the businessmen always stay ultra-rich, even when there are left-wing revolutions in their countries. And so they're alliance together. So for many of the rich and powerful, progressivism, leftism is just a vehicle, a cynical means of preserving or enhancing their own wealth and power. They don't believe in it at all. It's a way to control people and to misdirect them away from reforms that might actually improve society, might actually improve the economic circumstances of ordinary people. And I think Hillary Clinton is an expression of that, because my impression of Hillary Clinton, I could be wrong, my impression is she doesn't really believe in the things that she says. She's just a tool of the rich and powerful.
Well, yeah, I think that's right, obviously, and she's made a lot of money being a tool of the rich and powerful. But of course, part of it, and especially with the big business, is that the left promises to limit competition. I mean, the left has nothing but utter contempt for the petty bourgeois. Now, who are the petty bourgeois? The petty bourgeois, defined by the socialist left in Europe and Lenin and what have you, are small businessmen, people who are entrepreneurs, farmers who make surplus so they could sell food to other farmers. And remember, this is anathema to the left. When Lenin collectivized the farms, he precipitated a famine. He had to go to the new economic policy, NEP, which is a return to free market agricultural work. Let the farmers own land, let them produce surpluses to feed the rest of the country. Stalin, he reinstituted the collectivization and shot the kulaks, right? 40,000 of the successful farmers were shot. And what did that precipitate? Another famine. And what saved Stalin, of course, at that point was World War II and Hitler attacking. Two left-wing leaders attacking each other.
Right. First, after cooperating with each other, right? Hitler is often blamed for being the one who started World War II. Well, the fact is Hitler and Stalin both started World War II. The Hitler-Stalin Pact is where Nazi Germany and Communist Soviet Union agreed to partition Poland. They agreed to both invade Poland and then divide it between the two of them, and that's exactly what they did. Yet our media, our historians, etc., say the Nazi Germany started World War II by invading Poland. That is not true. Nazi Germany, or at least it's not, it's not complete. It's a lie by omission. Nazi Germany, the socialists of Nazi Germany and the socialists of the Soviet Union made a deal to invade and partition Poland, and that's what started World War II.
Hold up, we're up against the break.
Stalin was just as responsible as Hitler.
I got to interrupt you. We're up against the break. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Steve Ronaldo, host of the Classic Car Show on America's Web Radio. Just talking to you about antique car insurance. I think that if you're looking for the best coverage for your classic car, consider J.C. Taylor Insurance. They've been my insurer for years in this hobby and have the top rating of all of the insurance companies in the hobby. When you get ready for insurance, call J.C. Taylor or visit jctaylor.com on the internet.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Whether cruising the Strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, You need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the americasbroadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is America's Web Radio, and this is Progressivism. My topic today is Progressivism, the modern utopian religion. And this is my show, which I've just returned to. This is Robert D'Agostino returning to the show after a 6-year absence. Do facts matter? And of course, the answer to that is no if you're a leftist. Joe, let me ask you this question. There's a lot of stuff going around on the internet by a person or persons called Q. And of course, Q has been dismissed as a right-wing conspiracy theorist. And some of what he's written have certainly seemed to be true. Something I read that came out of Q the other day was hard to believe. You know anything about Q?
I know something about Q. I think at this point everyone is a conspiracy theorist. Certainly after 3 years of Russiagate, no reasonable person can deny that liberals, the mainstream media, and progressives, at least the vast majority of them, are conspiracy theorists, right? So after all this of Russiagate and so on and so forth, I think everyone is a conspiracy theorist now, and I think people do see that our government is controlled by very wealthy, very powerful people who have their own special interests. So you can call that conspiracy theory if you like. And in that case, I think everyone is now a conspiracy theorist. When it comes to Q, I think a lot of what Q says is true, but Q has also made a lot of predictions that have not come true. So
yes,
I'm skeptical that Q is any more real than just someone who kind of sees the big picture and follows the news carefully, as opposed to someone who has truly inside information.
Yeah, well, Q is always apparently saying, I haven't read that much, but I read one yesterday, I think it was, and the other time I read Q was a few weeks ago, about, we've got the goods on everybody. Somebody has the goods on everybody, and people are going to start getting arrested, and the corruption and all this money sloshing around, paying off bureaucrats, paying off the Bidens, that sort of stuff that he alleges have occurred. And these old people are going to all come to justice. That I find not believable.
No, it's not very believable. I know that many people in America want to be big fans of Trump. I am a Trump supporter. I voted for him. I expect to vote for him again. But the fact is he has not undertaken the fundamental reforms that many people have hoped for. And I don't know that he's going to. I think he probably isn't. I think he's going to continue to do kind of the tweaking that he's done, some positive things for the economy, good judicial appointments, and so on. But there's sort of the idea that, say, William Barr, who was Bush's attorney general, who's a very embodiment of the Republican establishment, who's now attorney general, is somehow going to clean house, right? I think that's very hard to believe that Barr is going to be that kind of man, right? Given his history, he's part of the club. He's part of the swamp, right? Now, like Barr compared to most swamp members, but he's still part of the establishment. So, I think the idea that this is going to happen, I think is unlikely, especially since the deep state, the Democratic Party, the Republican establishment, to get rid of him one way or the other if he really does try to clean house. So he has great difficulties in that. They control almost everything. And so even if he wanted to, I don't know that he does want to.
Well, let's assume he wanted to clean house, and let's assume that's why the Democrats are out to get him if they can, and the wealthy folks are out to get him if they can, because he knows where all the bodies are buried, and he could presumably be a threat to their control and their I scratch your back, you scratch my back, sort of doing things. So I think that's one reason why there's so much hatred and so much willingness to lie about Trump and to think up one crime after another. And just to support your position, I looked up the 10 top PACs, political action committees, and which party they supported. All right? And this is in the last election, 2018. 7 of the top 10 Democrat, 2 Republican, 1 split their money between Republicans and Democrats because what they were doing was supporting any veteran, whatever party they ran for, they were giving money to veterans. So 7-2, Democrat to Republican. And if you take a look at the billionaires, I mean the multi-billionaires, not people with just a mere billion, but people would have real multiple billions, and there are like 22 of them in the country, and 13 of them are Democrats, the last time I looked, and that's a little while ago. So all this information is available on the internet. Who represents the most affluent congressional districts? Virtually all of them are represented by Democrats. At one point, it was 8 out of 10. And this all can be looked up and researched. Yet, if you ask the typical American which party represents the wealthy, they say the Republicans. How do we get through this?
Right, and it's just not true, right? Perhaps it used to be true, but it's simply not true anymore. And when it comes to the ultra-rich, we actually have some survey data from a professor at Princeton who surveyed, very wealthy people in places like New York City and et cetera, asked them their political opinion, and they're all neoliberals. They're all, progressives on social issues, immigration, things like that, but they also want to keep their money, right? So they tend to be more economically conservative, so to speak. But they're all very progressive on these social issues, on these marker issues of, cultural superiority, right? Open borders, abortion on demand, and so on and so forth. And so they overwhelmingly identify to the liberal side, right? So that's where the ultra-rich are, and that's where they have been for some time now. And I think they've always been a revolutionary force in history. I think ultra-rich people have always been in favor of upsetting the standard social order, and particularly religion, because it was an obstacle to their own accumulation of wealth and power. Because traditional aristocracy, the military, the church, just local landowners, local business owners who have their own independent means are obstacles to the concentration of power by the ultra-rich.
Well, of course, I wouldn't ignore the ultra-rich's desire to, let's say, be the Jeffrey Epsteins and the what have you of the world, the Bill Clintons, and have access to sex whenever they want it and at whatever age they want. Look at that lawsuit out in California by Ricky Garcia against his producer and manager, and the things that are alleged there. If even half of what's alleged there about this poor kid starting at 12 years old, he was handed around as a sex toy all over the place, and the implication is on a lot of the Disney shows, starring those teenagers are, let's say, if not in danger of, at least in danger of being sexually abused, are being sexually abused. So we'll have to see how that case goes, and the case has gotten remarkably little publicity.
Other things along that line. We all know about Jeffrey Epstein, and the idea that he committed suicide does not make sense. 3 of Kevin Spacey's accusers, who have accused him of sexual abuse, died in the past, right? 3 died in the past year, including 1 supposedly committed suicide the very day after Spacey released a video online talking about how he wanted to kill his enemies with kindness. A 4th one of his accusers in the past year stopped cooperating with prosecutors, so they had to drop the case against Spacey. We've had a recent report from the government agency in Britain talking about how over 1,500 girls were abused, underage girls were abused as part of the Muslim rape gang in northern England, about which the police did nothing for over a decade because they were afraid to be accused of being racist. We know that Jimmy Savile, the famous British entertainer, 300 children complained against him. Nothing ever happened to him. He passed away a free man, so on and so forth. So we have a lot of evidence of many nefarious things going on, whether it's child sex abuse, whether it's financial crimes, whether it's breaking down of the family, promoting all sorts of evil things, open borders with immigration, with lots of people coming in and undermining the economic welfare of working class Americans, so on and so forth. So we see a lot, and I think we're living through a time of exceptional corruption and exceptional breakdown. I think it's the job of people who care, right, to provide for an alternative positive future, or a positive alternative to what our ruling class wants for us.
But the progressive movement has essentially supported or covered up all this, except when it suited them to do something else. In other words, it suited them to go after Catholic priests because it can destroy the Catholic religion, or they were hoping. But if it suits their purposes financially and sexually and what have you, the progressive movement has embraced all this stuff or covered it up.
Right. Public school employees have a child sex abuse rate 3 times higher than that of Catholic priests. They abuse far more children every year than Catholic priests. But you never hear about it. You never hear about the lawsuits. This is not to excuse Catholic sex abuse scandal, but it just points out the selective outrage, the selective focus, and the fact that they'd rather focus on a relatively small number of victims if they can make the perpetrators look bad than go after the bigger pool. Like they'll focus on police officers who, unfortunately, of course, badly, wrongly, shoot unarmed black citizens maybe a dozen times a year, but not the thousands of homicides against black men by other black men in the inner city, right?
Well, I think this brings up that we're in a culture war. This is a lot of ways worse than the Cold War, as Dave Moxley pointed out earlier, and we're in a culture war, and I'm not sure we're going to win it.
Right. Some more people are talking about actually splitting America up into 2 or more separate countries. That's really the only way forward. I mean, they're talking about splitting the state of Virginia up right now as we speak, right? More and more people are talking about that.
Well, it seems in Virginia the governor is really trying to precipitate a shooting war.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah, this may be correct, and I think that one thing I think would be very useful for listeners to keep in mind. Whenever someone tells you you have a moral responsibility to do something that they're telling you, they're making a religious claim, right? So progressivists and others are constantly hectoring us about what we need to believe morally, what we need to do morally, who we are, right? What our identity is. This is not who we are, they say to anyone that they don't agree with, oftentimes, right? So think about that. You know, they claim to have some sort of secular morality. Such a thing doesn't exist. All moral claims are essentially religious claims. They're not scientific. They're not truly philosophical. So whenever anyone tells you, you must believe this, you must believe that when it comes to something moral, you must do this, you must do that, they're making a religious claim upon you, and you should evaluate it accordingly.
Okay, time is out. We've had a 1-hour show. I hope some useful ideas came from this. Joe, thank you very much for agreeing to appear on my comeback show.
Yeah, I'm glad it's back.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about